So let's get started here. A very warm welcome to our webinar today. We're really excited to kick off the first session in this webinar series. And as you know about the topic, with the momentum we're experiencing with AI, shipping faster has really become table stakes. The hard part really is the continuous validation, and that as we're moving fast, we're not breaking things for our users. And that's what really we are digging in today. How enterprises can stop also testing reactively, and build that mobile release confidence. So I'm Ashwini Sathe. I'm Senior Group Product Marketing Manager here at Sauce Labs. And joining me today is Parth, who's from our Solution Engineering team. So hi, Parth, if you'd like to intro yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Ashwini. Hi, everyone. My name is Parth Patel. I'm a senior solution engineer here at Sauce Labs. Been with Sauce Labs for just over 5 years and in testing for the better part of the decade. So I work with a lot of our current customers and prospective customers, learning more about their current challenges in testing and really about, more importantly than testing, in release, right? So really excited to talk to you folks today about few different topics and hopefully have a nice interactive demo as well.
Absolutely. And we're excited to have you, Parth, and bring all your expertise here. So let's begin with some of the challenges we are seeing out there, right? So where are engineering teams really getting stuck? A pro problem that we're seeing emerging is, AI is generating code faster than, legacy test infrastructure can validate, right? The data that you see here comes from the Sauce Lab State of Mobile App Quality Report, where we really surveyed around hundreds of, engineering leaders, QA leaders, and how they're approaching mobile quality, what's working for them, what's blocking them, and where they are really investing. A big percent, 53% of engineering readers really pointed out that scaling test automation is a number one challenge for them. Around half of the respondents really said that insufficient coverage prevents them to catch critical defects early. A good percentage, around 33%, talked about how the burden and the cost of managing in-house devices, quickly adds up. And a big part of the challenge is also the limited visibility into real world, performance, production issues, and how to get to root causes quickly, right? So the through line really is speed and quality feel like a trade-off, and really they shouldn't be. With that, Pars, I think we like to hand it over to you. We've already talked about test automation and some of the other challenges. So if you walk through, what those looks like, what are sort of the maturity levels organizations are going through, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Ashwini. So before we talk about how to get to release confidence, we have to be honest with ourselves about where our teams actually are today from in one of these four parts of the automation journey. So to the very left, stage one, we have manual only. So every regression is run by hand. It's very exploratory, it's ad hoc, and it's very dependent on an individual tester's knowledge, right? And for early stage teams, for small teams, growing startups, this works until it doesn't, right? The moment that you add a second platform, additional devices to test, or release cadences that are faster than monthly, then this all sort of collapses. The bottleneck here at this stage is simply human bandwidth, right? There's only so much a single person can test before a release, especially as you start adding those additional platforms and devices, like I mentioned earlier. When you get to stage two, limited automation, then teams take the obvious next step, right? They start writing automation. They pick a framework of their choice, Selenium, Appium, maybe a homegrown framework. And this is where 49% of teams get stuck. So that's almost half of the industry, right? So you're not alone in this. And why does this happen? It's because at this stage, your scripts require specialists, SDETs to write and maintain. As device fragmentation grows, there's new Android and iOS versions, there's new screen sizes. So your maintenance debt grows faster than your coverage is able to even keep up with it, right? And this leads to your flaky tests climbing, right? People stop trusting the test suite, right? Failures start getting ignored, and eventually the team is running tests and nobody believes the results, right? You've seen that when, you're just maybe running the same tests every day. Nobody really knows what the tests are running for, right? And so if the test doesn't have a purpose, then really, you're not just losing time, but you're losing money, right? Spending time and money testing on the wrong places. When we get to stage three, that automation at scale, right? That's this is the elite DORA hallmark, right? CI integration, parallel execution, every code merge runs against real devices in the cloud, and coverage scales linearly with developer output. And the breakthrough, the thing that actually makes this work is having, persistent sessions on a real device, right? All integrated within a development environment. So reserve a device for the entire suite and run tests back to back against the same session. Manipulate test states against that session. Whenever something fails, you can keep that session open and inspect live failures instead of sifting through logs, right? So it's like the next evolution of being able to detect and remediate issues, right? So getting that capability for debugging, being able to use the same devices and same session gives you more accurate results. The bottleneck at this stage used to be infrastructure throughput and coverage velocity, right? Could you spin up devices fast enough? And we've largely solved that with some of the offerings that we have here. The new bottleneck at this stage that we've seen is that AI-generated code volume has outpaced what framework-dependent infrastructure can validate. So that takes us over to stage four, agentic autonomous testing, right? Some folks are here, but many folks are still chomping at the bit to get here. I'm sure many of you folks are having tons of AI conversations internally. But getting here requires infrastructure that agents can actually reach. MCP connected agents interacting with real devices at speed that only work if the device is exposed as programmable infrastructure, not locked behind a framework, which is why this frontier has moved. AI agents don't just execute tests, they write them, they triage failures, and they self-heal when the UI changes, right? Having MCP connected agents that interact with real devices the same way a human tester would, but at machine speed and scale. So I know I said a lot, but as you look at this slide, I really would like for you to just do one thing. Be honest about which column your organization is currently in today and what bottleneck is actually slowing you down. Because the playbook from moving from stage 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, et cetera, are different. And if you misdiagnose it, then you're spending the wrong time trying to solve the wrong problem, right? We've all seen the classic testing pyramid, but today the landscape has changed, right? I mean, you've seen it over time, from waterfall to agile to DevOps, and now we live in this AI-assisted world, right? So we aren't just testing code, right? We're managing costs, speed, and intelligence of our systems, right? We need to look at our strategy not just through the lens of what we test, but where we play today versus where we need to stay competitive. Okay. So starting at the bottom, at the foundation, low cost, high frequency, right? So at the base, our high frequency agent engine is designed for high output automation, right? Because the cost per test is so low, this is the safety net for functional regression, right? Every time a developer pushes code, these tests should run. It's about catching the small breaks at scale before they ever move up the chain, right? If you aren't automating here at a high frequency, you're leaving yourself to chance. And as we go through this pyramid, the later that you catch these bugs, the more cost ultimately that will be incurred, right? Which is why we want to do the highest frequency test at the bottom because it is the most economically scalable way of testing. Moving to layer two, we find our mid tier, and this is where things get a bit more realistic, right? We're moving away from isolated tests and validation into production-like environments, right? Like similar to like a user acceptance testing. This is the quality of experience layer, right? So beyond traditional regression testing, we're looking at accessibility, right? Your ally score. We're looking at visual UI and UX changes that are happening, as well as app performance. So we're checking how the network behaves, how the app feels, It costs a bit more and takes a little bit longer than a regression test, but it's critical for ensuring that the features that your team has worked so hard building actually work in the wild, right? Um, and then from there, we move up to the third layer, right? High cost, low frequency testing. So this is low frequency by design because, as I mentioned, as you get higher on this, the cost becomes more expensive. So you want to make sure that you're really spending your time and dollars wisely, right? At this level, we're involving complex use case validation and using real beta testers, right? Getting this into the hands of real human beings to get their feedback of how the app is performing. Because ultimately, that's the satisfaction of your customer base of your application is what's going to drive the growth of your app. So uh, from there, why do we do this? It's also the frontier for agentic coding, right? So using AI agents to build or test complex user journeys. We need this level of scrutiny to ensure the UX is intuitive, right? You don't need to do these tests for every button click, right? It's for the uh, journeys that define your business, right? So let's pick the most critical flows, the most critical parts of your application, whether it's customer satisfaction, whether it's revenue generating, right? And focus on those and make sure we get that feedback from the customer. And then as we get to the very top, the crowning pyramid, if you will, that makes the rest of this work is unified insights. So testing doesn't just end when the code is deployed, right? We need to have in place instant and closed feedback loops that connect releases back to production and test environments, right? So notice I mentioned production as well. So it's not just about, did a test pass? It's about in production, where did it fail and how quickly can we fix it, right? Like making sure that your mean time to detection and mean time to remediation are as fast as possible so that you're able to roll back changes and fix errors before your end user has a bad experience, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to solve is having a good customer experience. Now I'd like to take a moment and put this into action and show a quick demo of the Sauce Labs platform in action and how it can benefit you regardless of where you currently lie in your automation journey. This is the Sauce Labs platform. There's a lot of different aspects to this. For today, we're really going to be focused on real device testing. And so I'm going to start by going over here just to showcase to you how you can help solve that coverage challenge, right? Like we talked about having an increased number of devices, Apple and Android pushing out OS updates, what seems like weekly, right? And how do you stay ahead of that? Well, with Sauce Labs, we have a public real device cloud, which allows you access to all of the latest and greatest phones, device models, operating systems, right? Whether it's whether it's iPhones, Samsung phones, Google Pixels, tablets like iPads and Surfaces and things like that. All these different devices are instantly available for you to not only run your tests uh, one by one, but you can run them in parallel at great amounts so that you're getting that maximum throughput. I'm gonna just go over here really quick to my IDE and I'm just gonna launch a series of tests so we can see what that looks like. So as that launches, we can see I have 11 devices currently running. If I go over here to our automated tests, we can see that some tests have already started running. We can see additional ones have run. So we can see all these different types of devices, operating systems that have been selected, right? So instead of having to individually test these one by one locally, right? Even if you're doing automation, you're really limited to the device that you have on hand, right? Which not only becomes a pain because you have to run them sequentially, becomes a security concern as well. With Sauce Labs, you're able to scale that out and run them across this large series of devices, right? And in doing that, I'm just going to wait for these to finish, but we can take a look at some test results right here. So what's great about these tests is that not only do you get to run them right on real devices and see if they passed or failed, but you get all these great assets as well. Like a video of the test as it happened. You have access to the device logs, Appium logs, other framework logs. Um, we can go over to this network tab. We can see all the API calls and HTTP requests that were made during the test. And we also can see device vitals, right? Things like CPU performance, memory performance, UI responsiveness, right? So these are what we call mobile app diagnostics, right? So understanding from a device level, is my app putting stress on my application? Is my app putting stress on the device, right? At different parts of the test. And is it maybe putting more stress on an iPhone 14 versus an iPhone 17, right? So getting that device coverage is not simply about do the buttons click or, am I able to assert certain things on these different devices, but it's also, is my app impacting the device itself, and maybe the specs are too low on the device itself. So what we want to make sure is that you're looking at this from multiple angles, and we help you do that with all these great mobile app diagnostics. Taking it one step further, right? We're assessing this from an individual test level. Going over here to home, now we can get a more holistic view of the performance of all our tests, right? So we're able to look at from like a time range, right? Like how did our tests pass? Like how are they doing? Like looking at builds themselves, like what is the pass rate? What is the error rate? Are we actually testing across the different coverage of devices that we've specified, right? Making sure that we're covering our entire user base. Going down, there's a lot of different facets here. Like I mentioned, we want to be able to look at this from multiple levels, right? Being able to see which devices are failing the most, which test cases are the flakiest, right? Because then now we need to assess, like, okay, maybe some elements have changed, right? We can look at these flaky test cases, and then we can also take a look at this failure analysis and notice that if this same element has changed across multiple tests, then that's what's causing it to fail, right? So all these different signals that you're getting from Sauce Labs help you quickly assess what's going on with your application, right? And there's additional functions here. You can see it like your visual builds that are happening, right? So on top of your regression testing, you have visual tests as well. And then also you have production error reporting, right? I can see for all my different applications here, what is the error rate, right? In production. So, we're trying to close that gap from, build, test, deploy, and beyond. Want to mention that, as you continue to build out your tests to get code coverage, you can utilize Sauce AI authoring to create that test code coverage across multiple platforms, right? So if you're still in the process of thinking like, okay, I know some of you folks mentioned that you're at manual testing today, right? Well, Sauce authoring will allow you to write your tests in natural language, right? You can utilize existing test steps that maybe you utilize today, import them into authoring, and it will generate tests for you that you can run inside the Sauce Labs platform, right? So we want to make sure that irrespective of where you lie on the maturity curve, that we have these different options available to you. And as you graduate from that, then you can move into testing at scale with our public real device form, right? And then beyond that, we also have private real devices here, as you can see annotated by these private badges, right? These are devices that are solely dedicated to an organization, but they also have added functionality. And I want to go to my IDE and show you what I mean by that. So going over here to my IDE, I have this project up, and what's really cool here is that I can click here, and this is a Sauce Labs plugin that's part of my IntelliJ IDE, and now I can actually start a session within my IDE. So if as a developer, having to switch between your IDE and hundreds of different softwares in your tool chain hundreds of times a day is just not feasible. So instead of disrupting your workflow, we integrate it directly with the IDE, right? And with Sauce Labs Access API features, you can stay within the IDE for all your development, debugging, and testing needs. So I have opened this device up, and you can see that I have my device log streaming here, right? If I want to, I can also start network capture to start capturing network requests as they're happening here. I can interact with this device, right? Just like it was plugged into my computer. And why don't I go ahead? I have this app that I just built, right? I can just drag and drop it in here, and it will install this app on this device. And now um, I have this device, right? And I can interact with it just like I would if it was plugged into my machine. And I have full control of this device, right? So um, I can test against local mock servers. I can use IntelliJ's debugger to set breakpoints, step through my line code by code, and see the app react instantly. I can also launch a local Appium server. So I can do that right here. And what I'm going to do as this is launched, I'm just going to grab the session ID. I'm just going to put it here. And I'm going to go ahead and run an automated test against this. So since this device is mine, its reserve is mine, I can run as many automated tests against it as I would like. We can see that'll run here. And in Sauce Labs, like when I ran all those parallel sessions, right, it would run the test, it would complete the test, and then it would reset the device, right? With this, I can keep the device in my possession for as long as I would like, right? And the great thing is that it's totally framework agnostic, right? So it's the same script, the same commands, but a completely different level of developer control. So it helps us ship left, but also helping increase our mean time to resolution. I can, record the logs as they're happening as well, right? All kinds of great things. It's just similar to like if I had this plugged directly into my computer. And now that I've, run some tests, what I can do is I'm going to open up another one here. I'm going to use our friend Claude. And with utilizing the Sauce Labs MCP, I don't need to hunt for data. I can just ask Claude to pull results directly into my workspace. So I can say something like, give me the results from the last real device failed test and tell me why it hit. And so now Claude's going through the process of pulling some of these items. It's showing me that the most recent job is the regular network speed test, which we were just looking at. So it's going to pull the details and show us some good stuff. So as you can see, it prints out exactly the information that we need, the command that was launched, and what we need to do in order to slice. So this is, really powerful stuff. Especially, this is a little bit later on the maturity curve, right? I would say, starting with automated testing at scale is definitely the best place to start based on some of the polling questions that were given earlier on. But this is really, really powerful stuff, right? This is something that your developer is going to love, that you're able to keep these devices, directly in your IDE and not to disrupt your workflow, right? Having Sauce Labs become part of your workflow.
Thank you, Pat. That was a great demo. Through the demo, we walked through various aspects of what your teams can really achieve, and over the next few slides, we just want to bring home a few points. When we think about in practice, your teams needs to work across hundreds of devices. And to do that reliably, with Source Real Device Cloud as part of the overall Source Labs full lifecycle platform, we are really addressing some of those key challenges. So whether it's giving your developers access to, 10,000 plus real Android and iOS devices on demand, don't worry about the procurement, the maintenance queues, and completely offload that infrastructure burden to Source. To address some of the compliance gaps and issues around shared or unmanaged devices, our private device pool really comes in handy, which is dedicated to your org. And it's really critical for regulated industries and environments where, it's not just a nice to have, but almost like a critical aspect. Source Labs also has a very strong sort of security posture. We work with some of the top enterprises, and security vetting is a big part of how they finalize their investments, and through the certifications and security posture through our trust center, where you have the transparency to look at where we really stand on our security, just gives you that access and that transparency that you need. We've also, always hear from our, customers that, the rip and replace is always a scary part. Nobody wants to really, they because they've made that investment, they want to platforms that are framework agnostic, that work well with the stack that you already invested in, right? And that's a big advantage. And so Source Labs has always been that platform, that really works in your developers' workflow and works with your stack. So the biggest shift here really has been, your device infrastructure stops being a bottleneck that your teams need to manage and become sort of a scalable asset that where your pipeline runs on. That's the goal here. Uh, the way we think about mobile apps, how they are being built today is that's fundamentally shifted now. AI capabilities are now embedded at the device and OS level. So the infrastructure that runs and tests these apps also needs to keep pace. And that is where we've introduced Real Device Access API, which really exposes the devices directly over the HTTP. So when you think about your AI coding tools, whether it's Copilot, Cursor, that start executing test workflow autonomously, they need direct device access. So with this capability, AI agents can really interact with devices as native infrastructure, right? And Source Labs Real Device Cloud is the only cloud where that is possible today. With zero framework lock-in, as you think about how your tooling is now evolving, you are really not locked to one framework just because that's how you started at one point, right? The persistent session model here is really what helps you to run, longer 24-hour consistent sessions. So that eliminates that setup and tear down cycle where teams are spending a lot of time, when traditional testing is concerned. And some of the early adopters of these capability have seen up to 40%, time savings just on device usage. So that's a huge benefit. With Access API, there's deep observability available, and that definitely has a huge impact on development productivity. Many of the customers who have used this capability have started to unlock use cases that were really blocked when they were just restricted or constrained by traditional UI automation frameworks. And that's really opening up new markets for them. So if you've not tried it, we'd love that you explore this capability. We will send you some more information on it for sure. Parth also touched upon some of the incidents to insights, areas here, and I wanted to bring home a few points. The real cost we hear is not just for test failure. It's the risk to the customer experience, and the time developers are really spending on debugging just to get to the root cause. So teams are not really short on the test data. What they're short on is what to do with it, right? And with Source AI for Insights, we have dedicated AI agents that are surfacing some of the most critical test pass and failure patterns, the issue patterns, without really the manual debugging or digging. And when you have the insights that are very specific, that are actionable, when you have signals that can be unified across your entire SDLC, your teams can really make those data-backed decisions across each gate of this life cycle. And ultimately, all the things that we talked about today really becomes a business impact conversation, right? And that's why we wanted to highlight some of the aspects of ROI and business impact here. What we have seen, some of the enterprises that have worked, directly with Source Labs, as they made the switch to Source Labs, they were able to achieve some good results that had direct impact on how their business was moving forward. So whether it was the savings, it was 2.66 savings on infrastructure and operations alone. DFIC score before release increased to up to 95%. Now that is really big reduction on risk for any business that has a revenue critical mobile app today. App incidents that were impacting the business really dropped 4x, and developers could see 90% of their time savings because of full diagnostic suites and AI-driven insights. So these are just some aspects that we wanted to highlight because it's really important for leaders to, showcase what their investments are really doing in terms of the quality and actual customer impact that it can bring. Uh, while today, overall in the demo, we did focus on core parts of our real device testing, but I did want to talk about, and really showcase the benefit that teams can get with a full life cycle AI quality platform. So with Sauce Labs platform, you're really getting that autonomous learning loop with human oversight, of course, and you go from author, test, and analyze. So you have the intent-driven test authoring, which Parth also mentioned. When it comes to testing, you can test across virtual devices, real devices at scale, execute visual regression, take care of your accessibility and compliance, bring in data feedback with real users, and do all of that in a unified platform, right? So we're really offering a closed loop, right, from pre-production through production unpack, which is, the production insights as they feed back into the testing layer are also a very critical aspect of what we can offer today. Flexibility and extensibility is really a key here, whether it's MCP, APIs, IDEs, and AI coding tool integrations. We are providing a platform that is really critical to AI native development and overall release confidence. So we are just moving beyond test execution, right? We are really thinking through the entire software development life cycles that your teams are now responsible for. With that, I think we covered a lot today, and we'd love to take some of the questions. I already see some of the questions have come in around Access API as well. So Parth, let's get going on some of these. One question was around for teams whose workflows are really hitting the limits with Appium and Espresso. What are some of the use cases examples that are actually being unlocked for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say because it gives you direct control over the device, like the vitals, files, system level shells, you can perform performance testing that standard automation usually struggles with. I know I had showed device vitals earlier, right? But since you can reserve these devices for up to 24 hours, you can monitor long-term CPU usage, memory growth, and UI responsiveness over time, right? So I can think that this is like the primary way to catch slow burn memory leaks and background thread accumulation that crashes apps after extended real world use. So getting those same types of device vitals, but getting higher on the pyramid to more real everyday use, I can see that as like a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then, you know, I can see like with this level of control, like, connecting it with Android Studio and monitoring things like battery consumption, CPU consumption. I think maybe even like screen jank and things like that. I think that's like a next layer of performance testing that could be super, super exploratory and also super interesting.
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. One question is around private devices really here. For teams in regulated industries or with strict security requirement, what does the private device setup actually look like? And how does that differ from the shared public devices? I know, Parth, you did touch upon it a little bit in the demo, but if you
Yeah.
can just give some good pointers here.
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question. I think it's definitely a unique offering, and something that's really popular amongst our customers is that you have devices that are solely dedicated to your organization and your teams, right? To the point where you can even assign it to specific teams. I think your security teams will sleep well knowing that these are not shared, right? Both of our solutions are covered under our various security certifications, but you know how security teams can be. They often like having it completely dedicated to you. Um, but yeah, like I think having these devices specifically part of your CI pipeline becomes super useful, right? Like you don't, if you know that you need to run this device 24 hours a day, you have this device plugged into your CI pipeline. If you have extended use cases, things that require SMS testing Google Pay, Apple Pay, right? The private devices, since they're yours, allow you to access such features and not cause any type of security compromises, right? So, to best summarize the usefulness, I would say it's around, security and compliance for your security teams, as well as availability and as well as extended use cases.
Mhm. No, that's important to mention. I think that's all we had for today, really. Thank you for listening so far, and we really hope you found this discussion useful. We did have one last poll here. So based on all that you heard today, are you really interested in learning more? So, please pick the option that suits you, and our teams will definitely reach out accordingly. But that's all for today, and thank you, everybody, for the engagement and participation. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining.